So right now it is time for our up close and personal segment featuring Greg Morley. Greg Morley currently is in Hong Kong, where well, I think it's like 11:30 right now, I think. Uh, so
About that, yeah.
Yep, 11:30. We got that right. So please join me on screen. There he is. So we can say hello to Greg. And Greg, I want to thank you for your dedication to Odyssey Media and our program today. You, by the way, are the Regional Human Resources Director, Asia Pacific at LVHM. So we are happy to have you. Big fans of what you do, the brands you represent, and how you go about doing what it is that you do. We'll find out a little bit more about that in a second. But first, I know your company represents wonderful brands. And so I want you can use your brands or not. I would like you to choose 3 brands that would describe you as a person and you as a boss.
Oh, right. Well, thanks for having me. As we had talked earlier, I'm a big fan of yours, and I'm really pleased to talk with you. I was super energized by Miss Clemens because what she's saying is so relevant to what we do every day. And maybe as I think about the brands that represent me, I can also think about how that applies as I work outside the US and learn more and more about working outside the US. So I've always been I was a champagne, a Moet Hennessy champagne fan before I ever joined the company. And so I've always been a big fan of the brands. I've also been a big fan of Belvedere because it's a brand that I associate with my friends and with socializing. And in fact, I became a huge fan of whiskey brands in Moet Hennessy because of the heritage and having my family be immigrants from Ireland. There's quite a connection for me in that world. I think as a manager, I'm very much of a communicator, and so probably the manager that I am. Gosh, that's a tough question. I hadn't thought about what kind of manager I am in terms of, but a lot of our brands, and maybe I go back to champagne brands, are about inclusion, about celebration, about uniqueness. And I think in terms of a management style, that's very much of the type of person I like to be and person I am in a leadership perspective as well.
Okay, so reviewing that as a person, you like the finer things in life, but you're not too stuffy. You like to relax and have a good time. And you also are, you can go, high class, and you can go to a bar and pull up at the bar and have a nice shot of whiskey and talk to the person next to you. So you're well-rounded, well-open. You go from, you can travel in all circles is what I got for you in terms of your personal brands. Now, as far as your drinks, or your brands, I should say, as a boss, I didn't really get it. So in words,
okay.
Brand,
so let me try to recraft my story as a brand. So I am I am what I am, and a lot of the brands that we have are also that. They tell a very rich story. They have a rich background, and I hope that I have that. But also, what you see is what you get with me, and I think that's actually helped me in having an international career, because as you maneuver yourself around the world, you have to be authentic, you have to be vulnerable, you have to be willing to learn and challenge yourself. And if I think about some of the products that our company sells, specifically, again, if I go back to champagne brands, they have very strong histories, but they're very, very authentic and unique to the people that consume them. And that personal relationship is something that I find is quite important in leadership, that I'm an authentic leader. I can be personal with the people that I work with, and then we have a collaboration and a celebration together in our work.
Well, that's really important, because just describing who you are and how you work is a lot of it's a good takeaway for us, and those of us who are joining this conference today in terms of how to navigate, not just here in the States, but also globally, because that's where we are. It's a global community for sure. So that's very helpful. I'll ask you a little bit later about some other tips that we could use as we try to traverse the world in business. So how long have you lived in Hong Kong? And due to the tension in Beijing, has that changed how you live your life personally and how you do business?
Not so much. I think, so I arrived in Hong Kong 15 years ago working for Disney. And perspective is interesting because I worked in a Disney theme park, which is a very American product. And one of my first impressions of walking into Main Street, Disney, Hong Kong Disneyland, when we first opened was, wow, there's so many Asian people in the park today. Because there I was on Main Street, USA. I could have been in Florida or California or anywhere else. And so this perspective I had of coming to Hong Kong and really then feeling, okay, I'm in a different place, a different part of the world. And if Hong Kong has certainly changed over the last 15 years. It's become closer and closer with China. China's becoming more and more of a presence in Hong Kong. The last year for all of us around the world because of COVID has been something that we could have never imagined. Imagine that the situation in Hong Kong goes back even further than that. So we've been dealing for even a year before that of pretty significant protests, disruption, and really a yearning for Hong Kong people to have a voice. And so it's been also quite meaningful to me being an American looking back at my home country to have gone through that here in Hong Kong and then to sort of participate from afar with what's come from the George Floyd murder. And so it's life has been extremely interesting here. It's been in a way rather psychologically tough as well because you've participated in something quite intense here. We went into COVID, and then what happens in the US has brought it all back to us here abroad.
Yeah. You know, and on that note, we're dealing with a pandemic, a worldwide uprising for social justice and equality. So does this propel the calling and need for diverse teams, or is there an underlying adverse effect?
It's a great question. And I think, this is me talking, and one of my other role is global head of diversity and inclusion for Moet Hennessy. And as we've had discussions coming out of the recent events in the US and COVID, it's intensified, I think, a yearning for people to not go back to the way things were. And let me give you some examples.
Sure.
So in the past, I think there was a certain hierarchy that existed in the workspace. So the boss had the office, the subordinates worked outside the office. All that has disappeared. There is no office wall anymore. And because of, I think, some of the structures of the barriers that physically exist in our companies, this COVID situation has accelerated people's ability to have a voice. So you and I can get on a Zoom call as easily as this. I can be talking to you in the US, you can be talking to me in Hong Kong. There's no barrier anymore. So what I've seen coming out of this situation is people are not willing to settle to go back to what they had before. They're not willing to go settle back to, I'm going to work 9 to 5 in the office. They're not willing to settle to go back to not having accessibility to their bosses and senior management. And I think it's actually going to accelerate change, accelerate inclusion, and in a way, sort of bring more equity to the workplace. Because our employees just will not go back to the way it was before. And I think that's incredibly energizing.
That it really is. And listen, if women, and particularly women of color, are really sincerely now being hired, especially due to the equality equation at the forefront, I'd like to get your advice for women, and again, all women of color in particular as well, what's your advice to not only get the position, but also get the power that is supposed to come with that position? We don't want it in title only.
Right, exactly. So there's a huge benefit to anybody in the workplace to have for advocacy and sponsorship. And I think that I see this specifically working to propel women of color within LVMH and specifically in Moët Hennessy, where women of color have been those who have joined the organization, who have sponsors and advocates, and then get exposure in the organization, are really, really excelling in our organization. And that's, I think, a key to their development over the long term. That kind of sponsorship and advocacy shows a commitment from the organization to talent. And there's I would say limited bandwidth for senior management, so they really have to sort of pick and choose their advocacy. And I see that as a key factor for people to women and women of color to rise up in the organization.
So you're
see that happening around the world.
You do see that happening around the world, is what you said, Greg? Did you say you do see that
happening? So
I have a follow-up question for you.
We have.
Let me jump in. I apologize, only because we had a little bit of a glitch there, but I want to jump in here because I'm short on time now, and you've had so many wonderful things to say, and I want to circle back to something that you started. Just to clarify, I heard your last answer, which was that at your company, you work to propel women and you give them the support system and advocacy that they need to succeed in your company, and that you do believe that that's happening more now around the world in various businesses. So you mentioned earlier when you were describing yourself and your brand and your personal characteristics as a person again and as a boss, that was something that we were all closely listening to. If we don't already possess those attributes, we could definitely try to emulate them or to take them on in earnest, of course, because everything has to be authentic. So you gave us those tools and those tips. So I want to know, wrapping up, what if you had any of these women, any of us who with you today, who would be considering maybe working abroad, not just in your company, just in general, because you live and work in Hong Kong. I want to know the basic tools that we would need to pursue a job on the international front. For instance, tell us how difficult it might be to get a company to sponsor your work visa, how long you could expect to stay abroad, and some of the unknowns that you can share with us in your experience.
The greatest unknown is not that many people want to do it. So it sounds, when someone says, oh, it's an international assignment, there's an opportunity, very limited numbers of people can do it because of a family situation, or they have an interest in going abroad, they have an interest in putting themselves out there. And I think actually there's a lot of people in this community who do that all the time. So you've come up in situations that have been challenging. You've had to put yourself out there. You've had to challenge the status quo. So working abroad is like nothing. So that I would encourage people, anybody coming up in the company, and especially women and women of color, to just raise your hand. Because in our organization, there's a lot of mobility around the world, and we encourage people to take that tranche. I was talking to somebody on my team today, and I said, somebody asked you a question, if there's an international assignment, what would you say to them right now in this environment? And she said, do it. And so this is the opportunity now, is that it's an unstable environment, but people that can put themselves out there, that can take a risk, will thrive in this environment. And our hope is that we continue to have more people moving around the world. We would like more people of color going into our Hennessy Maison in France, because that is our customer base. We would like to have more Asian talent going back to champagne houses to be part of those leadership teams. And that's our aspiration as a company, and we're going to make that happen.
This
Very.
brings up a really burning question, you guys. I've got the Q&A and it is on fire, and we have a lovely question. It says, how fluent, people are worried about out there is how fluent do I have to be in the key language of the parent company? So do I need to speak French to work for Moet?
Great question. So I speak, I lived and worked in France for 4 years. And when I went there, I spoke one language well, which was English. And when I left, I spoke too poorly. So I had learned a little bit of French and lost a lot of English. And one of the things that's important about language is it doesn't, in our company, it's not a requirement that somebody's fluent in French. But because we are a French company, it's important that we understand the culture of the company, the culture of France. And I think Miss Clemens put her finger on it in a number of cases, and knowing the norms and the ways that people communicate are very critical to being successful. And so no, you don't need to be fluent in French. Most of us aren't, and we survive quite well, but you do need to have a passion for learning, understanding, and curiosity.
And Greg, is that something, if I can, Kim, just quickly to follow up on that quick question, is that something though that we could expect, say for instance, if your company wanted to promote someone to go work in France, is that something, would you kind of give us a little bit of a care package, if you will, not necessarily physically, but also just in teaching before we go, a crash course? This is what you're going to need to know. This is how this culture is. And some of the tips that Linda gave us, when you're in Paris, don't make this gesture because it's offensive, or et cetera. So your company, in other words, won't just send you out there to the wolves. Is that the way it works?
In all honesty, we've done that in the past, and it doesn't work very well. So we now we're working on some programs to get much better at that. Different cultures are accepting of outsiders also in different ways. So certain places need more support, and that support now comes in the way of cultural training, but cultural training for managers and their new hire who might be coming new to the country. Could be some basic language training. Can also be cultural training for their families, their spouses, and their children, because they're also adapting to the environment. And also then what we're trying to make sure is everybody who does that kind of international mobility now has a buddy. So not their boss, not their team member, but somebody, if I came to work in New York, that I would be your buddy, and you'd say, hey, here's the way it works around here. Let me help you, show you around, and you can become familiar and comfortable. So we try to do more of that, because that socialization is critical to people's success.
Well, Greg Morley, I've enjoyed talking to you. I look forward to the next time we can do this. Maybe I'll have to get you on Fox and you'll do it.
Thank you for being so gentle with me. And I'm really thrilled to talk to you, and really thrilled for us to be part of this community. We're really blessed to be part of the Odyssey Media family.
Indeed we are. Thank you, Greg.
Thank you.